Whenever righteousness wanes and unrighteousness increases, I send myself forth. For the protection of the good and for the destruction of evil and for the establishment of righteousness, I come into being, age after age. Avatar: The Last Airbender was a 61-episode series that aired on Nickelodeon. By request, I will be handling this differently than other videos. This won't look at any specific episode, but rather to each book as a whole, less on details and more on overall elements. And if the video looks odd, don't worry. That's just because it's been repurposed for special 3D presentation to improve its marketability and to create an overall superior experience. Let's begin with the two halves of the title. The Avatar is derived from Hindu mythology, the original word literally meaning descent. It describes a deity becoming incarnate in order to restore balance to an unbalanced world. The opening quote from the Bhagavad Gita is part of Vishnu's frequent manifestations in various forms. Now, the Avatar in the series isn't a god, but the function is the same, and it combines it with the concept of reincarnation, most notably the idea of the Dalai Lama's continuous return. The Avatar is a powerful being who is a master of all the elements, and each time is reborn into the next nation in the cycle to bring balance among the four kingdoms. The four kingdoms are based on the four elements that tie into the other half of the title. They're commonly considered the Hellenistic elements, since they came from the Greeks and had a strong influence on Europe for centuries to come, but that was possibly due to an import from Buddhism, which employed the four for entirely different purposes. The elements, of course, are water, earth, fire, and air, and bending is the ability to use and manipulate them. Thus, our protagonist is an airbender. He is a master of manipulating air. Each bending style is tied to a style of combat as well. Airbending, for instance, is Bagua Zhong inspired, a defensive, fluid fighting style, while firebending is Northern Shaolin inspired, with an emphasis on rapid offensive strikes. The series opens with the boy in the iceberg, though we are provided essential information right away in the opening segment for each episode. But the first one is different, as our narrator, Katara, describes the Avatar, who could stop the advancing armies of the Fire Nation. But he seems to have vanished from the world, leaving the other three at their mercy and beginning a war that's lasted a century. A war that's claimed her mother and led to all the warriors of their settlement having to reinforce the Earth Kingdom in the hopes of stopping the Fire Nation. This leaves her brother, who's only 15, although in the world of Avatar 16 is marrying age, so it's not unreasonable really, as the leader of their tribe in their absence. But Katara, a year younger, is a waterbender without a teacher, and while they're out fishing, they discover a boy in the iceberg. The title promises, and the episode delivers. Freeing him unleashes a pillar of light that draws the attention of Prince Zuko, the Petey the dog of the Fire Nation who has been searching for the Avatar. Despite his uncle, General Iroh, believing this to be another dead end, he heads that direction and drills for the battles to come, even though his mastery of the basics of firebending is incomplete. The freed boy, Aang, is indeed the Avatar, but that's a fact he keeps to himself, though freely admitting that he's an airbender. Since Katara yearns to learn how to waterbend, she instantly idolizes him, while her brother is skeptical and suspicious, and objectively with good reason when we see the influence that Aang has on Katara.
Aang, stop! We're not allowed to go near it. The ship could be booby-trapped.
If you want to be a bender, you have to let go of fear.
Sure, but less catchy and far more pertinent is let go of pointless, reckless jackassery. Aang will say a lot of things that sound like wisdom, but he isn't wise yet. He's 12 years old, so his remarks are sometimes just thinly cloaked, self-serving comments. He's not trying to trick people about the whole Avatar thing, but he doesn't actually have all the answers. So it should come as no surprise that they wind up triggering a booby trap in this old Fire Nation ironclad, which draws Zuko straight to the poor village. And the thing we learn over the course of the show is that the Avatar coming to town, well, usually means the village is about to get an ass-whooping. So Aang is banished for his behavior, much to Katara's disgust.
Katara, you'll feel better after
You happy now? There goes my one chance at becoming a waterbender.
What we also see throughout Water is that Katara, while being basically a kind-hearted, decent person, nevertheless is a bit myopic on the subject of her abilities. It's understandable. She has something that makes her special, and having that frustrated is a difficult thing to live with. So sometimes she acts short-sighted or selfish, and will rationalize such behavior because of how desperate she can sometimes get. Of course, I only mention that because these are less obvious traits. She tends to normally follow her conscience and show compassion for others. Likewise, Aang is constantly getting drawn into these conflicts, But he is still a child, and despite the awesome responsibility he has, which he may momentarily forget about but never actually neglects, he still wants to act like a child sometimes. The series avoids the trap of making children who are actually adults in tiny bodies. So when Aang spots Zuko's ironclad heading for the village, naturally he comes to defend it, and soon surrenders to spare it.
Head a course to the Fire Nation. I'm going home.
Many aspects of the show gain an entirely new meaning in retrospect. Sokka has a change of heart about Aang because of this sacrifice for people that he barely knows, and he's ready to go after him even before his sister finishes her speech about why they need to go after him. I'm going to talk more about Sokka later on, but first, let's get back to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Charlie Brown here, who has the ability to easily escape his guards, but in the end gets knocked overboard into the freezing waters, where we learn that his tattoos were made with radioactive ink, and suddenly he's water-bending until he kicks the Fire Nation's ass. Ironically, the purpose of Book 1 is actually for Aang to learn how to do what he just did in the second episode, but the difference is that he can't normally do that, only when he's light up Aang with Kung Fu Grip. So to learn, they're going to have to travel to a tribe of waterbenders, which means going from the South Pole all the way to the North Pole. In traditional, very old Buddhist teachings, the element of water represents fluidity, and thus is an apt metaphor for the journey Aang, Katara, and Sokka must undertake to get to the North Pole, as they often seem as unable to control their destination any more than the river itself can. It can only ever follow the forces that route it, only ever able to escape its boundaries in rare, destructive moments. In addition, in waterbending, one of the most powerful abilities is a change of state between liquid and ice. And likewise, we see the transformation of Aang like he was when he fell off the ironclad, from his capable fluid airbending style into this hardened magical juggernaut, which we learn is called the Avatar state. The first stop is at the Southern Air Temple where Aang was raised, only to discover it's a tomb after a Fire Nation attack. Katara means well in trying to keep this a secret from Aang, but at the same time, how can he save a world that he is being sheltered from? Because like it or not, mistakes of the past, mistakes made here, have forced Aang into this position, and whatever the intentions, compounding one mistake with another, well, we learn just makes things worse. Aang discovering on his own, unprepared, drives him into the Avatar state and nearly destroys them all because he's not in control. Luckily, inside the temple, a statue of the previous Avatar, Roku, glows to indicate that there will be someone to guide Aang in fulfilling his destiny. This episode provides more info about the antagonists. While Zuko's getting the damage that Aang did fixed, Commander Zhao makes his first appearance, and it's revealed that Zuko's motivation for finding the Avatar is to free himself from exile. But Zhao recognizes Aang as a threat to the Fire Nation's plans of conquest that requires his direct involvement. His contemptuous treatment of Zuko contrasts him and recasts the prince in a different light. He's not some spoiled, impatient brat. He's just obsessed because of what he has lost, and he's still learning discipline. But there is more to him than the first impression implied. Likewise, Uncle is more than the silly old fat man who wants nothing more than to drink tea and play games. Because when Zuko beats Zhao but does not kill him in a duel, and Zhao tries to repay this with a cheap backstab, the silly old fat man is instantly able to stop him with seemingly no effort at all. The fourth episode is the Warriors of Kyoshi, where we find a group of all-female warriors defending their village, one of whom is going to be of particular interest to Sokka, and that can only mean...
Relax, Sokka. Where we're going, you won't need any pants.
That's not what I meant. Now, like I said, I'm going to speak about Sokka's character more in detail later on, but this is the time when his sexism is on display, commenting upon Katara's role and also making crass remarks about the warriors here because they're girls. Well, of course, he's being a bit of a tool here. In his defense, what we learn of the Water Tribe shows that this is their way, with the male warriors and hunters and the females in more nurturing roles. I'm not putting that up there for judgment either way. I'm only saying that Sokka's dickishness on this topic is a cultural-induced dickishness that he seems to overcome relatively quickly, as he eventually, and acting completely without prompting by anyone, I might add, returns to the warriors and with humility asks to become their student. Besides Sokka's training, we learn of one of the previous avatars, Kyoshi, who defended this place, and as always, this village which loves the Avatar winds up on fire before the end credits. Oh well. Next is the King of Omashu, set in this gigantic and amazing Earth Kingdom city. This time, Aang decides to cut out the middleman and go straight to trashing the city by himself, by abusing the delivery system in a way that his old friend Boomy suggested a century ago. The king throws him a feast, but it's because he's suspicious about this young, bald kid going by an assumed name.
Now, what do you have to say for yourself, Mr. Pippin Paddleopsicopoulos?
I should thrash you from top to bottomus. The king's a bit insane, so he decides to subject Aang to 3 deadly challenges in order to save his friends. He handles the first 2 eventually, but the third is a duel, and he figures he'll pick the elderly king to fight. Big mistake, as the guy's actually a powerful earthbender, and Aang barely battles him to a draw. It turns out he actually is Boomy, teaching Aang the importance of lateral thinking that the Avatar will need. Earthbending is central to the following episode, Imprisoned, where our heroes arrive in an Earth Kingdom village that's occupied by the Fire Nation. It's the first sign of the Firebenders' sense of superiority, that their technique is better because, unlike the other 3, they don't need to manipulate existing earth, air, or water. They can create their own fire. Their punishment is a mockery of this deficiency, by imprisoning earthbenders on a metal rig out in the ocean, thus with no way to resist their captors. There's no earth around for them to manipulate. Katara unwittingly gets a young earthbender sent there. She encourages him to use his ability to save an old man, despite the need for him to keep it a secret. She's likely projecting, since Sokka often poked fun at her ability before they met Aang, and wants to liberate him the same way that Aang liberated her upon his arrival. But instead the old man turns him in, so she and the others plan to rescue him. But even with her impassioned speech, the prisoners are so beaten down they refuse to hope again. They get the bright idea to use some coal, because this whole thing runs on steam power, and coal is really just a form of earth. So they bring that out for them, but even then they're not too certain whether or not they should resist. They're so beaten down by their captors, but eventually they're goaded into it, and soon they have hope again. They rise up, throw them overboard, and return home, fulfilling her desire for liberation on a massive scale.